If you take the logic whereby trans women, that is to say, people born male who declare themselves female and are now competing in women's sports, and you map it onto the Special Olympics, would it be permitted to declare oneself disabled in order to compete in the Special Olympics? And the reason that I think this is a useful thought experiment is that would obviously be a despicable behavior. You know, if you decided that what you really wanted was a gold medal in something, and you declared yourself disabled, and then you beat some actually disabled people, and you ascended to the podium and then gave your interview and said how proud you were and how hard you had worked, right? Everybody would presumably in 2023 look at you like, well, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Right? That's not cool.
That's despicable.
That's despicable. This is an institution that exists for a purpose. And, you know, that purpose is interesting. It turns out the Special Olympics were founded by...
so I just pulled it out. Founded in 1968 by Eunice Kennedy Shriver. Yep.
And, you know, I found it a little hard to find a precise description of exactly what she was doing, but I think it's pretty clear that we can make the following argument.
Do you want to know what it, so it just says, founded in 1968 by Eunice Kennedy Shriver, Special Olympics provides people with intellectual disabilities continuing opportunities to realize their potential, develop physical fitness, demonstrate courage, and experience joy and friendship. And then under the facts, it's a little bit small, who is eligible to participate?
Yep.
Shall I share it?
Yeah.
To be eligible to participate in Special Olympics, you must be at least 8 years old and identified by an agency or professional as having one of the following conditions: intellectual disabilities, cognitive delays as measured by formal assessment, or significant learning or vocational problems due to cognitive delay that require or have required specially designed instruction. So that identified by an agency or professional as having an intellectual disability, for instance. Now, given that professionals are identifying boys as girls and girls as boys.
There you go. Why not?
Why not?
Why not? And
why
the
not?
answer is, in 2023, why not is pretty obvious, because it would be despicable. However,
it's despicable for boys to be called girls
in order to compete in women's sports. Right.
Yes.
And so I did want to, so there's obviously a important distinction here. The reason that the mind bridles at the idea of a abled person declaring themselves disabled, getting an institution or a professional to sign on and going and beating actually disabled people in order to get awards.
Yeah.
Right. The reason that is not something that we can accept in 2023 is that we still reserve in our minds a position of protection for a person who is intellectually disabled in this regard, right? Some kind of, I hope I'm not using an offensive term, but some kind of pity would cause us, I think, still in 2023 to defend such people. And women are not incapacitated men. This is an entirely different phenomenon. What women are is optimized for a different subset of roles in biology. That means that in almost all sports, women and men cannot compete directly with each other. Fairly, right. And so there is a slight distinction here, but I believe it is a distinction without a difference, because what has happened is we built women's sports precisely because half of the population was perfectly capable of benefiting from sport and competing vigorously in sport, but not if we, did it all in one mixed grouping. And so
that was progress.
And it created the ability for all of the good things that follow from sport to reach half of the population, right? By breaching that boundary in some sort of ill-begotten attempt to protect some tiny number of people from some largely imagined hazard, right, is obviously upside down and backwards. But I just think by, and thought experiments, I have to say, we have to be careful with, because many people do not understand their proper logical status. They are not experiments as if you have run them in a laboratory. They are not validations of something.
Or in the field.
they are not validations of what will happen if you did run such an experiment, but they are useful, A, to predict what might happen and then find out, or in order to explore territory where you can't run an experiment, right? So I don't know what will happen here. I don't know if we will ultimately find terrible people who misunderstand what the nature of pride actually is and seek to be proud of themselves for winning an award they are not entitled to by beating people who are disabled and therefore competing in the Special Olympics. But I wouldn't rule out the possibility that we're going there. I mean, we basically
I don't see why not.
destroyed every kind of logic there is. We, now cannot agree that 2 + 2 = 4, that men cannot become women, that pedophilia is bad.
You and I can.
You and I can, and presumably most of our audience, maybe all of our audience, save for the few haters, can agree on these things.
Yeah.
But we civilizationally cannot figure out how to shut down the sophists and the cheaters who wish to use our inability to precisely articulate exactly why in this instance you are not allowed to do X, right? That's what they're doing again and again. And this is a case.
And back to your point that it's much easier to destroy than to build.
Yeah, it's another kind of institutional entropy.
Yeah.
And I will say I was, when I went looking at the Special Olympics site, I was, as now happens so frequently, emotionally confused at some of what I read, because things that 10 years ago would, go to the front page of their site. Things that 10 years ago would not have struck me at all, would have struck me as just normal. There it is.
What is it?
The revolution is inclusion.
Oh, hello.
Right? Now, the revolution is inclusion. This is the Special Olympics. They're just, I can read that both ways. I can read that as the Special Olympics are heroic people who are looking to include people whose quality of life would otherwise be lower. Because, of course, why do we care less about the quality of life of a mentally disabled person? And it is wonderful that there's an organization that wishes to give them the kinds of rewards that come from vigorous participation in sports. And isn't it amazing that this works, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, I can read that inclusion as a code word.
Yeah.
And the point is that word setting them up for, why is the Special Olympics excluding certain people who wish to participate? And, here I have a person who this institution has declared disabled, and, I could see that happening. So,
yeah. No, I mean, inclusion starts out as an idea that makes good sense, intuitive sense, moral sense. But what it actually means is we've had a group with rigid boundaries, and we've been excluding some people. And so now we want to open it up. But that doesn't mean that every competition, every meeting, every organization has to have its doors wide open to everyone. Just as a nation state is allowed to have borders, a women's basketball team is allowed to say no man allowed. If you're a group of neighborhood kids, you're allowed to build a treehouse and say no boys or no girls. Like, we're allowed to create groups for ourselves and organizations with missions, in this case, specifically for those people who had been excluded from competitive sport before, right? And is it possible that someone could come along and say, I don't have an intellectual disability, but I want to participate? It's hard to imagine at this point anyone would fall for it, but given what has happened to women's sports, why not? And then given what has happened to the so-called professionals who would diagnose such a thing, of course. If you're willing to diagnose a girl as a boy, why would you not diagnose totally normal intellectual functioning as a disability of some sort? We know that's happening, and then use that as a ticket to entry into the Special Olympics.